All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Caregiving Wisdom Series. And if this is your first time, for those of you who've been here, you know that what we do is we bring in experts to share their wisdom with us. But their expert comes from two different places. First and foremost, from their own personal experience in caregiving. And then the lessons that we're going to hear about, especially tonight, that have been gained along the way. Let me introduce myself. I'm Deb Kelsey Davis, and with me is Kelly Johnson, and together we created Nourish for Caregivers. We're also, by the way, caregivers too, so we're living and walking the very same steps and journey that you all are. Well, we're really excited tonight to have Bruce McIntyre with us. I did want to say that we recognize you've given us an hour of your time tonight, and that is a precious thing to us. So what we're going to do is honor that. If we do end up being at the end of the hour and there's still questions to go, we'll just let everyone who wants to go, but we'll stay on and answer a few more questions. So we hope you find tonight that along with all of the practical support and information that Bruce is going to share, that you also find spiritual nourishment in that as well. So again, the chat box on the lower left-hand side, that's where we want you to do, is to really put those questions and answers and thoughts in there. Because after Bruce is done sharing with us, we're going to have an opportunity to ask him questions and hear from him directly. So, as we always do, we will begin with prayer.
So as we're beginning tonight, I think we'd like to just take a moment to quiet ourselves and just kind of let this prayer wash over you and nourish you and support you. This prayer today comes from our speaker, Bruce McIntyre, and it's, I think, a little glimpse into his heart and what's important to him. This poem first appeared in today's Caregiver in 2007 and has been reprinted and shared thousands of times. As we begin in prayer, Bruce also shares this from St. Francis de Sales. Be at peace. Put aside all anxious thoughts and imaginations. A prayer for caregivers. Unknown and often unnoticed, you are a hero nonetheless. For your love is sacrificial, is God at his best. You walk by faith in the darkness of the great unknown, and your courage, even in weakness, gives life to your beloved. You hold shaking hands and provide the ultimate care, your presence, the knowing that you are simply there. You rise to the face of the giants of despair and disease. It is your finest hour, though you may be unaware. You are resilient, amazing, and beauty unexcelled. You are the caregiver, and you have done well.
Bruce, that was beautifully written. And without further ado, I want to introduce you to everyone who's here. So Bruce McIntyre, I met you, Bruce, what was it, about 4 years ago?
Like that.
Something like that. So who is Bruce? So Bruce is the CEO of the Parkinson's Foundation of Oklahoma. And he's the author of not one, but two, but 4 books. Let me give you those titles. Thrive Anyway, what we're going to talk about tonight. Parkinson Positive, Graceful Transitions, and Resilient Life. There's a theme there, Bruce, in your writing. Bruce shares his expert guidance and warm humor with thousands of people each year, and I've actually sat in the audience of those. He's keynoted such events as the 2016 National Caregiving Conference in Chicago. Bruce, that's where we met the first time. And he also did the first regional caregiving conference of the Southwest in 2019. He also speaks at a number of disease conferences, well over 100 gatherings, church events, and he's been doing this since 2008. Bruce has been recognized as one of the one of the first year's recipients of the National Visionary Caregiving Award in 2018. So as a caregiver's wife for the past 16 years, Bruce understands the world of chronic illness and caregiving. He earned a Master of Divinity in 2002 and has led the Caregiver Fundamentals Project in Oklahoma City and served family caregivers as a church, a business, and a nonprofit leader. You can learn more about Bruce, and we're going to give you his contact information at the end. But before we start, Bruce, I have a question for you, because you do have a sense of humor. So what I'd like to know is, share with us one fun fact about you that maybe we don't already know.
Okay, so I think the best fun fact maybe is that when I was 19, after my freshman year in college, I worked at Opryland theme park, kind of like a Six Flags. My job was to guess people's age, weight, and birth. I'm not on duty tonight, however, so I will not be able to do that. But it was a fun job. Got me in a lot of trouble, and but also had a lot of fun doing it. So just a summer college job.
That's a great summer job. I bet you met a lot of people.
Especially the ones that when they got on the scale, I put my foot on the scale with them. Those I really got.
I can see why you got into trouble, Bruce. Well, Bruce, we turn it over to you. Kelly and I are going to disappear now, and it's yours to take.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm so glad those of you that are joining us tonight have joined us. I want to start with a quote from Amy Poehler, the comedian. She says, "You are more than this one story of crisis." The thing is, when the diagnosis comes and you just get started with caregiving and entering the world, most likely of chronic illness, there's a whole new vocabulary, a whole new world. And it's almost like you have the blinders on for some time, and all you can see initially is everything that's going wrong, all the things that are not working. And so it's a good reminder, though, that that's not the only reality of what's going on. That's not the only thing. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the paradox of both and, not just either or, but of both and. And so I'll tell a couple of stories as we get started here before we really get into the slides very much. That maybe demonstrates this notion of both and. My wife and I have been married now for 25 years, this year, 2020. And in 2001, we had no children at that point. We lived in Abilene, Texas. And my wife was pregnant with our daughter, 2 or 3 months along. So like any good husband, I arranged to take my wife on a beach vacation, my pregnant wife. And so one of the closest beaches to us in Abilene, Texas was Galveston. I don't know if you've ever been to Galveston, but if you've been to Galveston and you've been to any other beach, the other beach is probably a better beach than Galveston, but it is the beach nonetheless. And so on that trip and in that early point in our marriage, we had already figured out that we don't vacation the same way. My wife is one of those people on vacation who, if you wake her up before 9 o'clock in the morning, we are going to have problems. And I, on the other hand, am a person who wakes up at 5 o'clock and I go out and I want to go for a walk and a jog and, explore this new place. So we already knew this about each other. So I'd laid my clothes out. I snuck out of the room down to the beach for a jog. And as I was jogging about a mile, I realized at some point, and as I'm going along the beach, barefoot, as it turns out, beach sand squishing up through my toes, and I'm jogging as the light comes into the morning into this dark, impending, ominous storm. Thunder rolling, lightning flashing as this storm kind of rolled in to the city. And I decided I should turn around because I can't jog much farther anyway. So I turn around and start jogging back towards the condo. And as I do, it occurs to me that I'm now jogging into a beautiful sunrise. And as I'm in the midst of this storm and sunrise, now jogging towards the sunrise, I notice something a little bit, maybe 100 feet or so out into the water, and it's two dolphins. And they're just jumping in and out of the water, undulating their way up the coast. And so I stop to consider this profound moment of paradox. Dark, ominous storm, beautiful sunrise, and the dolphins and I just right there in the middle. And when I reflected on that some years later about our situation of chronic illness and caregiving, it occurred to me that that was a both and moment. Because on that morning at that time, it was not only a dark, stormy day or a beautiful sunrise morning, it was both at the exact same time. And it's occurred to me over about 16 years or so now with my wife's condition that sometimes the most beautiful things and the most horrendous things happen on the same day, the same week, the same month. And it's easy to see the bad ones. It's easy to remember those and talk about them. But we also have to remember, and I want to remind you tonight, to also notice the funny, the beautiful, the poignant things that happen along the way as well. And the title in this is Lessons, though honestly, they're probably more like reminders. You probably know all these things already, but there are a few that will be good. And don't worry, I'm not going to do all 12. But this paradox of both and really has resonated with me. And it's also reminded me of this word that's become more and more popular in recent years, thriving, but not just thriving, thriving anyway. And maybe anyway is actually the operative word here. Give you a little example of what I mean by thrive anyway. My family, we love to go to arts festivals around Oklahoma City. There are 3 that we go to every year. And the Paseo Arts Festival is probably one of our favorites. And so a few years ago, we went early because it was going to be a really warm day, well into the 90s. And so as the artists were setting up their booths on a Saturday morning, we got out there early. And the festival kind of happens on 2 levels in a little arts district in Oklahoma City. And we had gone through that first level. And my son and I were out ahead of my wife and my daughter because my daughter is much better at slowing down and walking with my wife at her pace. My son and I, still not very good at that. And so we burst my son and I, onto the upper level street as artists are setting up. And we notice one guy, and I saw about 10 to 20 seconds of his life. That's all I know about him, but he was a great embodiment of thrive anyway. He was on a medical scooter with one of those little orange flags on the back in a triangle. He had long gray hair with a ponytail. He had a blue jean shirt with the sleeves cut out and blue jean shorts that had been cut by himself. And he was probably, I'd say, mid to late 70s. And the thing that caught our attention is that he was driving that medical scooter as fast as it would go, which was not alarmingly fast, but it was just noticeably fast. And not only was he driving it fast, he had his head tilted back and he was singing at the top of his lungs, "Get your motor running." He's singing Born to Be Wild, and it captured everyone's attention. He flew past us, turned up into a neighborhood. It was one of those moments when everyone looked around at each other like, "Did you just see that? I saw that. Did you see that?" I looked at my son, who at the time was about 11 or 12, and he said, "That guy was awesome." And I said, yes, he was awesome. And I thought about that later, and I thought, I don't know what condition landed him on a medical scooter. And I don't know what all he deals with or what his day-to-day is like at all. But I know that for 10 to 20 seconds of his life, he was singing at the top of his lungs, and he was the featured act at the festival. And so I thought he was a great example of thriving anyway. Well, a few reminders that I'll share with you, and I'll try to highlight some of these with some stories as well. Okay, so you know this one well, most likely. Denial is natural. It's just not helpful for very long. Well, we know all about this, right? There's a great quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, very quotable, and she says, "Denial helps us to pace our feelings of grief. There is a grace in denial. It is nature's way of letting in only as much as we can handle." So denial is usually used in a bad connotation, but denial is totally natural. Most of us experience some degrees of denial. The thing is, it has a limited shelf life. As Rosalind Kaplan said, denial is useful until it's not. And most of us, though, it's that self-defense mechanism at the very beginning where denial kicks in. My wife and I, when she first got sick with dermatomyositis, say that 3 times fast. It's a rare autoimmune disease. And we lived around Nashville, Tennessee at the time. And our life was going swimmingly. Things were great. We were 31. Our daughter was 2.5. My wife had just given birth to our son, our second child. He was about 2 months old. And with her situation, it declined rapidly. Within a matter of weeks, she could not pick up either child. Her weakness was just incredible. A number of other symptoms showing up as well. Fortunately, she was diagnosed by a Vanderbilt doctor, and we went home. We had never experienced chronic illness. And so we just assumed, even though the doctor said we don't know how to cure it, we'll probably have to try several things to figure out how to treat it. We still assumed that we'd take the medicine and my wife would be fine. Well, we went home and took the medicine and she was not fine. In fact, things continued to get worse. Of course, we had a baby and a toddler, and we weren't sure at what level they were processing all this. But one night we found out. In your own experience, I suspect you've had moments that jostled you out of denial. And this was one of several for me. We were finishing up in the kitchen one night, and our 2.5-year-old daughter was on our sofa in the living room as we walked back in. She had her favorite baby doll, Mandy. And while we had assumed that maybe none of this was affecting her at all at such a young age, we found it different because she was processing what she heard from her mom through her baby doll. And as we walked into the living room, we overheard her in her squeaky little voice saying, "Mandy, Mommy loves you very much, but Mommy's sick and she can't pick you up. But if you can climb up on the sofa and get in my lap, Mommy can hold you." I mean, that's still almost makes me cry. And so we rushed in to the living room and we realized, no, she knows what's going on. Throughout her life, we've learned that she's highly intuitive, but she was processing her mom's illness through her baby doll. Crucial moment of coming out of denial for me. So denial is natural, though. It's just not helpful for very long. Another thing that we've been reminded of along the way is that is to create beautiful moments anyway. Again, there's a great quote here from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I know you'll think that this book is chock full of quotes from her, but actually I think these are the only 2. They're just so good. She says, "The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen." And so one of the things that we've learned along this way is, honestly, I think we were probably about average judgmental kind of people. That's funny. You could laugh at that. But I think we're not particularly worse or better than anyone else. But I will say through 16 or 17 years now of dealing with my wife's illness, I really feel like we give people more of a break than we used to, because we just have this assumption. We don't know the story. We don't know exactly what someone's experiencing. And so hopefully we like to think that maybe this is making our children better, and perhaps this is making us better people as well. But it's not just that that happens, but there's beautiful moments that you create or that just happen along the way. I took my wife when we were newlyweds on a camping trip, and everything went wrong that could possibly go wrong. And at the end of the camping trip, I said, "So you probably don't." No, no, don't ever ask me to go camping again. So I haven't. Um, and she would tell you that that's one of the few silver linings of her illness, is that she doesn't have to feel guilty about not going camping with me. So I took the kids. They didn't know any better. They're now freshmen in college and a sophomore in high school, but up until a couple of years ago, we went camping a couple times a year. And after one of those trips, like any good dad, I told my kids stories around the campfire that we agreed we would not tell mom about. But when we got home, at this time, my son was about 5, and we got home, we got cleaned up, we had dinner that night, and he keeps encouraging me to tell this one story. And I said, Seth, it's really not a dinner time story. I don't think mom is going to have the same appreciation for this story that you do with your refined 5-year-old sensitivities. But he kept wanting me to tell the story. So I relented, as you can well imagine. And about halfway through the story, he realized that as much delight as he and I and his sister had on our faces, that mom's face was moving the other direction, because sure enough, this was not a dinner time story. And so he stops the story, comes over the table in dramatic fashion, says, "Dad, stop. You have dislocated mom's happiness." Well, sure enough, we had dislocated mom's happiness. And we spent the rest of the evening trying to relocate mom's happiness. Well, there are 100 or 200 or 1,000 moments like that along the way that are just beautiful moments. You have them too. Sometimes they even happen in a hospital. Sometimes they happen in the least likely circumstances. But while all these bad things are happening, you have to remember it's not just the bad and the horrible and the difficult. Those are true. They're happening. But also there's humor. There's love. There are poignant moments. And that was just one of many for us. And it's become a thing that we remind each other all the time. Whenever one family member makes another one mad, to this day, we'll say, "I think Emma dislocated Seth's happiness." And it's just an ongoing joke for us. So I encourage you to continue to create your own beautiful moments anyway, and you thrive anyway. And another one, is this notion of summoning your determination. You'll see here a picture of my wife in the recliner. She receives IVIG infusion therapy treatments. It's been one of the things that's helped her the most. She's actually able to work again now. She's a first grade teacher in Edmond, Oklahoma. For the first 3 years of her illness, there's no way she could have worked. She couldn't even drive for about a year. It was just terrible. But then as time went along, there were some gradual improvements, some treatments that we'd never heard of or that began to develop. And one of those for her is about every other month, 2 days in a row, for about 5 to 7 hours at a time, a nurse comes into our home and gives her infusion therapy. We max out our insurance, our out-of-pocket costs in the first month of the year, every year. But we're grateful for the treatments. The treatments make her sick for about 2 days after, but we figure, hey, if 4 bad days, if we could trade that for 2 months that are okay, then maybe that'll be all right. So I would say this about my wife, is that she has a great deal of determination. She has a great deal of faith. She fully trusts that God is with her through whatever she's doing. But she's also determined. And I remember early on in the illness when she told me one night, she said, I will not be a victim of this disease. I may have it. We may not cure it, but I am not a victim. That inspired me to get my act together as a caregiver, because I thought, I mean, the truth is she's way tougher than I am anyway, but that was truly summoning determination. Another way to say that from a faith perspective is calling on God for help. You know, I mean, God puts this in us to be able to get through some of the most difficult things. And our lists often are full of things we do not want to do. We don't even know how to do. And yet we continue to do them. There's a prayer I came across, I learned probably 10 or 15 years ago. And at first, I didn't even really believe it, but I kept trying it until I did believe it. And you may be well familiar with it, but it's just the enough prayer. It's just the prayer to go out, and I do this probably at least once a month on a day that I know is tough or going to be tough. And I just go out and pray, God, thank you for giving me enough for today. Thank you for giving me enough courage, enough energy, enough of whatever I need to get to bedtime for today. I don't know about tomorrow. I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm not worried about next week. Just for today, I fully trust that you give me enough. Now, that will be challenged at some point before I go to bed. I'll have to remind myself that I prayed that. But on those tough days, I've come to fully believe that. It's basically kind of based on the story of the Israelites and the manna, that every morning they got up and there was breakfast. They couldn't hoard it for days or weeks at a time, but there was always enough for that day. And I've come to believe that I have enough determination, enough energy, enough faith to get through whatever we have to face, at least for that day. And that day is all I really have to do anyway. It's all you can do anyway, right? Another reminder that we've had along the way here is this notion of being open to unexpected blessings. In my work with Parkinson's patients and caregivers, in pre-COVID times, we would have up to 100 people through our office, our main office, every week. And so basically the lobby of our office is a lab of caregivers. And I just hear so many caregiving stories. But one of my favorites, and please don't hold any of your patients to this story. This is Hall of Fame level story. I don't expect most people to do this, but it's a great story. And it's from a family. The gentleman had Parkinson's for around 20 years. He's passed away now a couple years ago. And his wife is one of those caregivers that's just one of the most lovely people you'll ever meet. Perfect combination of many good qualities. But they got into the later phases with Parkinson's. He had significant dementia along with that. And so the nights when he was just angry and beside himself and mixed up, and they would have these horrible nights. There were just, the paranoia was high. He was trying to board up the doors. And she said it was one of those nights again. And we were exhausted. Just everything had gone wrong. And she said, finally, I fell asleep. And then she says the next morning that she woke up, and normally she woke up before her husband, but she noticed he was out of the bed. She heard some clanging around in the kitchen. And then as she kind of tried to come to, she noticed there was a piece of paper on her chin. And so she gets it, it's a sticky note. And it said, I'm sorry. And so she wipes her eyes and she notices there's another piece of paper, another sticky note that says, I love you. And she pulls back the covers, puts her feet on the floor, and she realizes there's a trail of sticky note messages of love all the way out of the bedroom, down the hall to the kitchen, where her husband with Parkinson's dementia was making yet another mess. But by the time she got there, she said, I wasn't angry. We just hugged and we cried, and it was a great moment. Even in the midst of the both and the and, there are these unexpected blessings. And you can't always plan them. Sometimes they just happen. But I encourage you to peel those blinders back a little bit, because it's so easy to see all the problems. But in the midst of, a horrible night for that family, the next morning, probably one of the best expressions of love he ever had for her in their whole marriage happened. And we all have stories, and we tell them in different ways. There were the bad part that's so obvious: the tremor, the dementia, the memory problems, the medication, the physical disabilities that come with the disease, the exhaustion of caregiving, the frustration, all questions and no answers, the long pharmacy lines, the long doctor's waits, all these things. But there is also courage. And there is also determination and love and joy and peace and deep connection in the most unlikely moments. And I think that when someone tells their story, it may have taken us 3 years to tell a good story. I think early on, our story, if you'd ask us about it, it was just, this is bad, 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 bad. We don't know what we're going to do. It was hard to find the light. But there came a point when we started seeing the light. And I've always joked with folks that every great story of resilience, every great story of faith has a big but. You can laugh at that too. I know it's a little off color, but it's funny. And the way it goes is just in 2 or 3 sentences. You have people who say, well, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. I have these symptoms, but we found the right therapist. We found the right doctor. We've had these people who have helped us and supported us. We have people who say, my loved one, the Alzheimer's is getting worse. I feel like I'm losing him a little bit every day, but my support group has been there for me. My caregiving group has been there for me. My church has been there for me, and I'm going to make it. And so you see, as you think about your own story, there's certainly no problem telling the truth of the difficult part, but also tell the truth of the solutions and the beauty that is also happening. So there's that quote that we had at the beginning, that's, you are more than this one story of crisis. That's not all there is. There's more. And it takes me back in my mind to Galveston, that gritty beach, with that gritty sand squishing up through my toes, with that dark, ominous, thundering storm rolling into the city in one direction, and a beautiful sunrise in the other. And me and the dolphins just right there in the middle. It wasn't an either or day, it was a both and day. And it's the kind of day that reminds me of caregiving, and it reminds me of the paradox that we're all seeking to thrive anyway. You have the capacity of resilience. God gives you enough for each day that you can thrive in whatever definitions that means, in whatever altered ways that may mean, but that you can thrive anyway. I pray that this has been encouraging to you, and that some of it will stick and make a little bit of sense. Thanks for joining in tonight.
So Bruce, how can we find you?
So if I've been sending out for about 11 years or so. I do a blog, brucemcintyre.com. And if you want me to send it to you in an email, I'd only do one a week. So it's not, I don't bombard you. Also, I made the Kindle version of Thrive Anyway free through Friday. So if you want to get it that way, I think the print version's just $9.95 or something. If you want to email me, that's my email address there. And so I always am not quite sure about when you introduced me as an expert, I'm not so sure about that. I'm another caregiver, really. But we do try to learn, and I feel like we've learned some things along the way. And basically, all my wife and I try to do is just, share what we're learning, and hopefully it makes sense to other people.
Bruce, that's wonderful. And, thrive anyway. I like the anyway part.
I think that might be the operative word.
I really do. And, I encourage everyone, if you have any questions, comments, there's been several that have come in. I'll start out and Kelly, you can jump in. But Bruce, very early on, Anita made a comment about your wife and said she is beautiful and she has the gift of perseverance. And boy, you can really see that in her. In that image in particular, you can see that.
She is, and I have to say, she actually, if you met her, she's one of the nicest people you ever meet. And she actually is just that nice all the time. I can't say that about myself, but I can about her. She's really, really a lovely and determined person. Yep.
Richard commented, he said, about you, have the gift of the Holy Spirit here on earth. You are the Holy Spirit in motion on this earth. May you and your family have a blessed weekend coming up soon. And I just was thinking about, Bruce, you and your words being the Holy Spirit in motion on this earth. And you had kind of framed this as these are reminders. And I think that's part of what the Holy Spirit does, is reminds us of our Father's love. And so I would echo what Richard had said, is that, your words are the Holy Spirit in motion, and being able to share that with us. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Richard. That's a lovely thing to say. I thank you.
We have from Deborah, thank you so much. It was wonderful, followed by from Anita, again, excellent, heartfelt. It makes a difference and we're not alone.
Deborah had a question. She said, thank you for making Thrive Anyway available for us on Kindle. So thank you for that. And then she said, do you have any suggestions on how we can help our carees thrive?
Yeah, so this is almost like a whole nother talk, but because, and I've joked over the years that, some of us as caregivers, we care for people who are easy to care for. And some of us, I sometimes I hesitate to call the caree our loved one, because some people have a tolerated one, that not everyone is easy. Some people are very difficult. In fact, my wife and I have joked that if I were the one with the disease, this would not be going as well at all, because I'm just not a happy sick person. When I'm sick, it just frustrates me from head to toe. So I think part of it is in recognizing that we all just come to caregiving or illness with usually decades of our own temperament and personality and who we are and how we deal with things. And so you can't exactly make anybody take on that attitude. I think for us, one of the things that's just been so helpful is simply prying open the resistance and then putting ourselves in positions to hear from other patients and caregivers. And we get a glimpse, and we're like, oh, wow. So that person also has my disease, but they're doing this, this, and this. I never even thought about doing that or thinking that way or whatever. And then the other thing is the timetable. I mean, it's kind of like, essentially it's one big stew of grief, right? And so some people shoot through that fast. Some people, it's years of processing and trying to come to terms with what to do. But I think if you can nudge people in the direction of letting them have exposure to another patient, perhaps with some different condition, maybe with the same thing, that might give them a glimpse of here's another way to manage this. One of the things that was most helpful from my wife and I, we spoke at her national disease conference in 2014. In fact, this wasn't a book. It was 10 lessons at that time, and it was a talk. And we did it a few times, and then it turned into a book. And now, of course, it's been 16 or 17 years. I don't know that we have 4 or 5 more lessons, but we went and we thought we knew a lot. I mean, we were like, hey, we're very active in learning. We know it all. We went to that conference and met people from all over the country, and we realized we learned so much about better ways people were managing this condition as caregivers and as patients. And so I think that'd be my number one suggestion.
Yeah.
A lot of wisdom there. And I think, Bruce, one of the things you said early on that I was really happy about was that you said it was 3 years into your caregiving before you had that moment, right? Because I think oftentimes we might be beating ourselves over the head saying, well, why am I not there yet? Why am I not at the point where Bruce is at, for example? And it sounds like for each of us and for you too, it was a journey, and each of our journeys are unique. I believe it was a quote, so I'm going to throw a quote out there about brokenness, that sometimes it's not until we're broken that God can pick us back up and help us to come back together when we realize it's not of our own doing, it's through Him. So when you had your moment, what was that? What was that point?
Well, I don't know that there was one moment. There were many moments. I do know, one moment for my wife was, I mean, she's a great encourager. And she's one of those people that, writes notes and so forth. When we were in college, I used to get notes from her all the time. She was the president of her sorority. I was the president of my frat, and she would send me these notes. And I thought, man, I've got to marry this girl, and then come to find out she sent everybody notes. I didn't know that. So anyway, so she's always had the encouragement. I remember probably 8 or 9 months into her illness, she said, encouragement has always been one of my spiritual gifts, but I don't think it is anymore. And I said, no, it is. We just don't know what it's going to look like. Well, now her doctor, when one of her primary doctors gives a rare diagnosis of that disease, she'll say, okay, here's the medicine, here's the therapy, and call Kathy McIntyre. My wife has given that doc permission. I mean, there are maybe less than 50 people in our whole state that have her condition. So it's a fairly safe thing to do. But but on her side, there were different moments like that for me. I mean, I think the story with my daughter, holy moly, that got me when that happened. There was one moment I know about 3 or 4 months in that my wife looked at me one night and she said, and she had early on a lot of things that had happened. She had Cushing syndrome, which was a swollen hump on her neck and back, basically, from one of the medicines. She had swollen 40 or 50 pounds with when she's very petite and couldn't sleep. Anyway, she said, when I look in the mirror, I don't even know who I am anymore. She went to bed. I stayed up, and I remember thinking, I need to do some golden rule time here. I need to put myself in her shoes, because we were all at different stages of denial. She was much more in reality. And so I just basically contemplated, what if I were her? What if I switched places with my wife? So I'd say that was a moment that was important, that kind of jolted me out of pure denial. But then over that next 2 or 3 years, there was just all these gradual moments to finally come around and have a little bit of hope again. And, this is a self-incriminating story, but when we moved to Oklahoma City, I mean, so when she first got sick, I was a minister. I was the main minister at a church. And as this went on, I was like, she's so sick, I have to do something else. So I took a sales job in Columbia, Missouri, and I was admitted to a PhD program also. Well, then 5 months in, we had to put that on the shelf because she totally crashed again. So we moved in with my in-laws. I will tell you, in all the goal setting and planning I've ever done in my life, that was never made the list. And so we lived with them for a little while. And it went great, oddly enough. So that was its own process. And we moved back to Oklahoma City. In fact, we had an agreement that we were never going to live in Oklahoma City again. But, it was the right thing to do. In fact, I was out praying one morning in Columbia, Missouri, just basically, what is the truth? And I remember I could drive you to the house where, sometimes you hear, it takes longer to retell it than it does to hear it. One of those moments. And it basically was where the offer was on the table for us to move back to Oklahoma City. Our in-laws said, look, just move in with us. We'll help take care of the kids. We'll help take care of Kathy. And until you guys get on your feet again. And I was like, well, I don't know what we're going to do. We're not doing that. But that morning praying, and I came in and I told my wife, I said, this is what we're going to do. Well, it took me 2 weeks to convince her that that's really what we needed to do. So that was a significant moment, one of those forks in the road. And then this is the incriminating part of the story. We moved back. I had no job. I had 3 job offers within 2 weeks, 2 of them doing very similar sales work that I had been doing. And one was running the Caregiver Fundamentals Project, this grant program, which paid terrible. But I took the job. And it was the 3rd day of that job before it honestly occurred to me, and this was now 2006, that I was a caregiver. Like, I took the job leading caregivers, and I still did not think I was one. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I just looked at the job description. I was like, well, these are people like me. I bet I could do these things and lead these kinds of programs. And then I remember being in my new office and it hit me. I was like, oh, I am one. Okay.
Oh, okay. I get
nobody
it.
used that word. Nobody told me I was one. I just, you just do what you're doing. And now the term is so much more familiar, but at that time I didn't even self-identify.
Well, you're certainly not alone in that. I think caregivers for a long time feel like they're just, being a husband that's supposed to do that. Or, I was very similar. I was just, I'm a parent, I'm a mom. Of course, I left my job in order to care for my son at the time. So, yeah, you're certainly not alone in that, Bruce. That's funny. Though it is a little kind of humorous, though.
I don't claim to be the quickest guy. Takes me.
We all get there.
Sometimes. It's okay.
We all get there.
Bruce, Bruce, I wanted to ask you, I saw that you responded to the question in the chat. There was a question about the name of the disease,
dermatomyositis. Yeah.
Thank you. My tongue was getting twisted on that one. Your poem, I want to go back to your poem that we led our prayer with. As you were talking, you were saying that your wife declared, I do not want to be a victim. And that was really powerful to me. And you named your poem, it was about being a hero. Can you say a little bit more about at what point along the way that poem came from inside of you? And if you look back at it now, is there anything you would add to that poem? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but.
So that poem came about, I guess I had been leading the Caregiver Fundamentals Project about a year. And I was in my office, and actually, I don't think I told you this part of the story previously, but I really did try to make a part of, and I really have all jobs, but on some type of a regular basis, not just to show up at work and do the work, especially if it's in a helping kind of a job. But one thing I've learned over the years is when you forget to love the people, then the job gets stale. And so it was about a year in, and I remember, I don't know if I'd had an experience with some caregivers that kind of pushed me in this direction, but I know I was praying for some specific caregivers that we serve through our program. And in that context, it just kind of, the poem, and again, it's not the most eloquent poem that has ever been written, but but it'll do. It gets the job done. It's serviceable, I think. And it's kind of like that poem just came out, and it's like I was writing it down as fast. Like I think I heard it faster than I could write it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really wasn't thinking about me or my wife. I think I was thinking about this handful of patients and caregivers that our program served. And it just came out, and I was like, that's kind of good. And I kind of shared it with a few people after a couple of weeks, and they were like, wow, that's really good. And then I just read it we had a little conference thing when I read it in front of about 100 caregivers, and they all seemed to like it. And I was like, well, maybe I'll send it to that magazine and just see. And then they published it. And then I didn't really think much more about it. And then I kept getting these people contacting me to use it in different things. And so I looked it up one day. And I don't think this is true anymore. I don't know. I hadn't looked it up in a long time, but pages and pages of, PDFs of programs that it had been in, or websites and all this. I was like, wow, what do you know? So to answer your question, it's not the most eloquent poem, and people have written much better poems, much more technical and so forth. But no, I wouldn't change anything, because I think it does. I still have the same sentiment, and I think it captured the sentiment for that poem. I might write a different poem, but no, that one I would leave alone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to share my screen again, because I want to make sure everyone catches, Bruce, how to get a hold of you. And I really encourage Thrive Anyway. I hope you all will read that book. Bruce, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today, or your reminders, as you said, because it's, we do get stuck in those days in and days out, and forget, as you said, to sometimes, to switch your, change your lens, look at, there are the hard days, but just remember that there are the joyful days and the good days, and I shouldn't even say days, because sometimes it's just a moment in a day, but to stop and take that. And I think it is, changing the lens or reframing what you're looking at is so important. And even just the way we think about it, like, instead of I have to do this, I get to do this. And even just something as simple as that begins to reframe your story and define your story in a little bit of a different way. And, this was beautiful, as you're getting a lot of thank yous from people coming in. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate everybody who's joined in tonight. Thank you. I hope that at least some little nugget of all this has really landed with you and made sense. And maybe it's something that you can, that it sticks with you and is helpful.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. And Kelly, why don't we give everyone a little glimpse of what's coming next?
I was going to say, just as we're heading in towards the holiday, 2 weeks will gallop by quickly, and we'll be all that much closer to the Christmas and the holidays. So we have Amy Goyer coming to speak with us, and she is from the AARP family caregiving expert and author herself, talking about juggling caregiving during the holidays. So it's certainly a stress-filled time to begin with, and as we're juggling caregiving as well, Amy will have some really great insights and encouragement also. So we're looking forward to Amy in 2 weeks. And as you're going through this month of December, please stop by Nourish for Caregivers and take a look at the resources that are available, the meetings, the ways to connect with other caregivers. Bruce had talked about sharing stories, and that's certainly something that we do in multiple different ways. So take a look on our website for that. And then I would also encourage you to take a look at the Caregiver Companion, which is also available through our website or our publisher, Ave Maria Press, or even on Amazon or some local bookstores too. So very exciting. Makes a great Christmas gift.
So thank you, everybody. And Bruce, again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We hope you all will be back with us, and we hope in the meantime you all stay well and stay healthy. Our prayers are with all of you and your families, especially as the coronavirus continues to really spread throughout our country. And please all pray and keep our families and caregivers safe.
Yep.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. God bless. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.